Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every week to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace, and its absence, playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. Glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Hey, you two.
Hey,
Hey.
This is the last episode before we go on a 2-week vacation break, or
a brief hiatus.
whatever passes for vacations right now. But what's happening?
Going to see grandparents and not killing them is what counts as vacations right now.
Yeah, exactly. Before we begin, I want to say thank you to those who responded to the appeal for support last time. We've seen a lot of people step up, and thank you. It's really just encouraging. So, thank you.
Praise God. The generosity of people during this time has been pretty inspiring, I have to say. So, yeah, thank you.
Hashtag low anthropology. But absolutely.
That's right.
I agree with you.
I have to rethink my entire
I was
theology
like, I don't
now.
feel generous, but okay.
Well, before we dive in, what's happening?
Whew. We were supposed to be on sabbatical right now. We're supposed to be gone,
You are.
And
It's a different kind of sabbatical.
It's a different kind of sabbatical. It's really stressful and then nothing to do sabbatical.
That's the best kind.
Yeah. It almost kills you, and then there's nothing, and then there's just a void of things to do.
But
and
you're growing in such spiritual wisdom.
Yeah, and so now instead of that, we're going to Mississippi to see my parents, which will be great. And we've gotten a cabin in rural Arkansas, which is not the same thing as California, which is where we were going to go.
I hear Arkansas is beautiful, though. Actually, like the mountains of
my
Arkansas are
daddy's from
incredible.
Arkansas. It is really pretty. There's some hiking. It'll be what it is. We're honestly, we're just thankful we can get away at all. I feel like we're doing well. Honestly, I feel like we're doing okay. RJ, you're still in Houston. I can tell by the room.
I am. It's but 17 days from today, the Packers show up and pack up our house and move us to Florida. But we're really excited, and we found out Jackson will start college in the fall. Did I mention that last week already? Did I say that?
We weren't sure.
Yeah, they're gonna, as of now, they're going to start in August. Praise God. So things are okay.
Big news in our little neck of the woods.
You got a girl.
We got a girl,
Aww.
little puppy. My middle son's been begging for a puppy for years, and I did not grow up with house pets. But watching how much he loves puppies, and we have a lot of people who walk dogs in our neighborhood, it was just kind of felt like depriving him at some point, even though it's another thing to add into our insanity. My 3-year-old is just potty trained, and so
I was like, you kind of have a puppy in him. Yeah.
I kind of have a puppy. I felt that I've had a puppy.
You got to
in
have
him.
someone peeing on the floor.
And I was like, I guess I'm about to have a
Yes.
void of feces in my life, so why not just fill it again?
Yes.
That's right. You thought you were done cleaning up poop, but I guess not.
I
So,
desperately
praise
begged
God.
for new carpet in the rectory, and because our carpet's old enough to vote. And Josh was like, all right, let's do it. Let's go look at carpet. It's like we come home and both kids and the dog peed on the carpet. He's like, look, we're going to wait. Okay. Sorry. But until everyone's not peeing on the carpet, we're not getting new carpet.
That's right.
Well, so far it is like having an infant around.
Yeah.
Because this is a 10-week-old
She's
puppy.
little. Yeah.
Were you guys picky eaters as kids? Speaking of infants.
No.
No,
Not really.
No.
Were you?
In fact, I remember the moment when I decided we were just talking about this the other day at home because we have a picky eater. When I decided I was just going to give up on fighting my parents. I was like 4 or 5 years old and it was a vegetable soup. And I clearly remember taking a bite of it and being like, actually, this ain't bad, So but yeah, no, I wasn't, but we're definitely one of our kids is a picky eater for sure.
RJ, do you guys have any picky eaters in your house?
Not really. I mean, a little bit, but they're pretty good about eating just about anything we put in front of them, and they'll try it again, if they don't like it. But anyway, I mean, I know I have some stories. Should I tell them now, or should I wait for the
Let's wait
the
till
article
this
to be read?
article has been read. This was in CNN, and out of a study that just came out, picky eating linked to demanding parents who limit food. Study says demanding that a child eat or restricting food are associated with some of the pickiest eaters, according to this new study published Tuesday in the journal Pediatrics. Lower levels of picky eating in children were associated with parents imposing few restrictions on food and a lack of pressure to eat. Eating is one of the few domains kids can exert some control over, said senior author Dr. Megan Pesch, a developmental and behavioral pediatrician. As a result, she says, don't force kids to clean their plate. Don't make them sit at the dinner table until they eat a certain amount of food. And avoid bribing with food. I was going to say, I failed that test.
Josh, did you hear that? We got to stop bribing her.
Guilty as charged.
That can be hard for parents, Pesch acknowledged, sharing that she too struggles not to do the same with her 3 small children. It's a natural inclination to say, if you eat your green beans, you can have dessert.
Yep.
But that can backfire and create an even larger negative association with that food. The study found no difference among children due to socioeconomic demographics, but did find higher rates of picky eating among children who had problems regulating their emotions. Towards the end, though, she ends on a little note of grace. She says, some kids are wired to be more cautious, to be a little bit more anxious. I don't think parents should really feel a personal blame for this. Some kids are just going to be picky. After basically telling us that they're going to be a lot more picky if you force food down their throats. We happen to have one very broad palate of my children and then one increasingly narrow one. And then a 3-year-old who I don't even consider a sentient human being at this point. He basically subsists on pancakes and Uncrustables.
And fruit bars. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Uncrustables.
his is just give him whatever he wants to make him be quiet. And now we got a
Marshall
puppy.
eats so much cookies and cream ice cream, so much ice cream. You better feed him in the morning, and we have the freezer that's on the bottom, so he can just go over,
he can get it out of his own self.
Get it out, and just take it down.
Oh,
take
it was a
downtown.
dark day when my 3-year-old figured out that if he used all of his strength, he could pry open that freezer.
That's right.
But here we have the basic lesson of kind of, in our terms, it's the law increases the trespass. The injunction to do something, to eat a certain thing, to not be picky, actually produces pickiness. But let's hear your stories of this, because it's a very present reality for some parents. And I know actually some parents who are deeply ashamed that they go to places and their kids refuse to eat what their friends have made, and it's not anything medical. It's just that they only will eat chicken nuggets, So it's not a minor thing for some parents.
I do want to say, you shouldn't be embarrassed about that. If people are having kids over for food, or for dinner, they should definitely make frozen garlic bread. I don't understand. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Why would any meal lack Texas
frozen
toast?
Garlic bread? You always have they will always eat that and fruit. So no matter what else I make, there's frozen garlic bread and there's watermelon, and I know that someone's eating something.
Do you find this to be true?
I thought this was interesting timing. I'm eager to hear RJ's stories. Because we already ate a lot together. We already were, we're one of those families that tries to do dinner together. So we probably, in a bad week, we have dinner together 4 nights, but most nights we have dinner together. But now in the pandemic, it's every night, nobody's got plans, there's no meeting you're going to, everybody's eating dinner together every night. So, we've faced our picky eater, I think, with more regularity, and I think we're all just kind of collectively wearing each other down. Do you know what I mean? I'm giving up a little, she's giving up a little. It's just where we are.
Meet me in the middle.
We're also dealing with some emotional eating, that I don't think we did before. She just gets lonely, and today in fact, like an hour before we recorded this, she was like, I want you to sit by me. I want this, I want that. Please come over here. And I'm like trying to get work done. And she just like, slumps her shoulders and goes, I'm going to go get an ice cream. I was like, okay.
I've been there too.
This article, I broadly agree with the notion that, as we say, the law increases the trespass, as someone once wrote, Paul and Romans. But it made me think of my dentist that I grew up with, Dr. Kirchhoff in Connecticut, who I love, because I have bad teeth, and I've had lots of cavities and stuff.
Chink in the armor.
Well, and I finally asked him one time, I was like, Dr. Kirchhoff, like, why I brush, I floss, like, why do I have so many cavities? And I said, I don't drink a lot of soda, I'm not big on candy, like whatever. He's like, RJ, it's genetics. It's just all genetics, I was like, oh, thank God. And then the more I've gotten to know people, it's true. Like I know people who never floss and they've never had a cavity, and the converse is also true. And so the reason that came up, I thought about Spencer, my 15-year-old, who is the least picky and most adventurous of all of our eaters. Like he'll order at a fancy dinner we go to, he'll order the raw quail egg, and he won't like it, but he'll order it. And he'll give it a shot. But the one thing he hates is cilantro. He just cannot take cilantro.
That's tough for a Tex-Mex.
It is. And I was always like, what's the deal,
It's
dude?
another
like,
genetic
you like
thing.
Everything else, like, really? And then, of course, I listened to a podcast where there is a particular gene that if you have it or don't have it, whatever, cilantro tastes like dish soap.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, that's just the way it is. I wonder how many of these things are genetic. And then also, this goes back to the whole bondage of the will thing, right? Like if we begin to see these kinds of preferences not as the result of someone being difficult, but just who someone is, like, oh, you've got bad teeth. Oh, you lack the gene for cilantro, whatever it is, then maybe we can treat ourselves and our kids with a little bit more compassion and patience.
So the answer.
Yeah, and I also think, I know adults who and you guys have, I'm sure, been around adults like this who are really picky eaters as adults. And, sometimes that's just a matter of the family you were born into and the kind of foods you were exposed to. I agree with you, RJ, in that I feel like we have very little control, over how this plays itself out. This article did make me feel super guilty though, because I definitely do stuff with our kid where I'm like, if you eat this, you can have more ice cream.
Yeah.
More of your sadness foods. If you
And
eat
it
this, you can
totally
have
works.
More of your lonely food. Yeah.
You can have more of your sadness foods.
Yeah. but it does work. But it's, I don't know. I feel like this is such a thing with parents where we're all just kind of I don't know. I feel like we say this all the time at parenting, but doing the best we can in terms of what our kids are going to eat. Because there's always a comparison and there's a whole culture around parenting and what we feed our kids now that didn't used to exist.
Yeah.
Around is it organic and have you thought this through and what, all these kinds of questions.
Yeah.
And then all my kid wants to eat is crackers and, salami and
When you guys mentioned about genetics, I can't help but think the great passages in the New Testament where the man's born blind and they ask who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind. And I guess the answer when it comes to picky food, if it's really genetic or then it's your parents. Your parents clearly are the ones that's where the sin's coming from.
It's on them.
I only sort of joke. I remember being we were at a function one time and with some very well-behaved, lovely children, and we were asking them what their favorite food was, and one of these kids who was 6 years old said their favorite food was salmon and rice, and my wife, we almost both just threw up. We ran for the bathroom or something. We were like, we are the worst people in the whole world. What is wrong with us?
Our kids are Uncrustables, obviously.
I like pizza and I like it a lot. And that's what I will eat until I throw up. And we just felt like such colossal failures. And it's amazing how something like that, I could talk about reading levels, or I could talk about And some of those make a parent feel shame. What's interesting about picky eating things is sometimes kids will also feel shame around, like, reading levels, or they'll be well aware of who's the best athlete in the class. But picky eating stuff doesn't seem to.
That's really
there's
true.
no peer pressure around that. They're like, yeah, I'm just not going to eat that stuff.
Yeah, our daughter gives no ducks because, like, our son will eat everything, and we'll be like, "Look at your brother! Like, he'll eat this, this, and this." She's like, "What a
Want
loser!"
Mine?
Yeah.
Want mine?
The other thing that makes me think of, though, is that people, that we hear this as the sort of the law-grace dynamic as it relates to feeding children food. And, of course, there are times in which if a child doesn't eat any, vegetables, they're going to, have some health issues.
Yeah.
Or if all they
can't
eat is
poop.
Uncrustables,
That's what we
it's
say
not
at our house. Look,
Yeah.
you won't be able to poop. It's
so
gonna be a real
is
problem.
there is like a first use of the
Yeah.
law, like just basic. Well, you got to eat this.
Yeah. Do
And
you know what an enema is? It's not fun
and
for anybody.
Your mother or I worked hard to make this, and you're gonna eat it. You do know what an enema is.
God, that never works.
The last thing I'll say, gosh, I guess this brought up a lot for me, is that there was a wonderful article a few years ago. I think Mark Oppenheimer wrote it, about how when he was growing up in the 80s, it was a very progressive move for parents. Like, liberal parents were the ones who were cool with fast food. You ordered Domino's because
interesting.
it was a way to say that the woman was not having to cook meals all the time. She was not
sure,
chained,
of course.
and it was totally fine. And there was a relaxation around food and around that stuff. And then to grow up, and then to basically be like, you go to if you're in a blue state situation and you go to a certain type of birthday party and everyone's monitoring what the kids are eating and whatnot. And Domino's, if you serve it to your children, you might as well just be handing them poison apples or something. It's the same. These values, they fluctuate so much. Or what was once liberal is now conservative, and what was conservative is now liberal. And you're seeing that, of course, with all sorts of other COVID-related things.
Yeah.
I notice it's like, generally speaking, the rule keepers in my when I was growing up were always the more conservative folks, the button-down folks. And now today, I saw yesterday a guy wearing a big mask with an AC/DC logo on it. And I'm thinking, like, that sort of rule following, while I understand where it's coming from, it's the absolute opposite of what AC/DC as a band stands for. They are rebellion. They are about nonconformity, and they're about doing whatever the hell you want at all times. And so these things they switch hats all the time. So it's hard to take any of it that seriously.
I just, like, now all I can think about is those birthday parties where they go around, there's like this person with this terrible job that works at like a bouncy house place that deals with kids' birthday parties. God help them from this wretched estate. But their whole job is to, like, walk around with the pizza.
Yeah.
And then walk around with the cake. And there's always like this weird dynamic with the moms where they just like put their hands up and they're like, "I'm good, I'm fine, thank you. No, I'm okay, I had a smoothie, thank you." And I'm like, "Come on, Whitney, you want some cake."
Whitney!
Poor Whitney. Oh, man.
Well,
what a rough home life she must have.
We're going to shift gears from talking about picky eating to talking about something much more serious. This is a week, we're recording this actually the day after riots have broken out in Minneapolis related to the death of George Floyd, the black man who was suffocated with a policeman on his knee. And this is the latest in a number of just absolutely... For me, I'll say that because of the footage and the photographs, it has a almost uniquely stomach-turning effect. It's burned into my head in a way that, it's almost like it's going to become an iconic photograph. But if you're like me and you feel unqualified or just uncomfortable talking about racism as a person, who doesn't feel uniquely familiar with the effect of it, shall we say. I was looking at things, and in 2018, actually, the New York Times ran what I found to be quite a gripping article called "How to Talk to a Racist." This was written by Margaret Rinkle, and it gives us a way in. This is what she writes. She says, "Being called a racist," because that's what we're once again talking about, almost never causes a racist to wake up. Being called a racist almost never causes a racist to say, oh, wow, you're right. I get that it's hard not to scream racist at a racist. If you're a white person who wants to be an advocate, it's both infuriating and demoralizing to know that the people causing all this suffering are people who look just like you. But here's what's also true. Prejudice is endemic to humanity itself. Human beings are tribal creatures. We trust the familiar and are drawn to it. We distrust the unfamiliar and keep our distance. Further on down the article, she says, so if you're a white liberal whose goal is to feel morally superior to such racists, go ahead and urge them to check their white privilege. Call them stupid rednecks. Get online and tweet your feats of moral daring do in the cause of a more just society. You haven't made a single thing better for anyone suffering the actual effects of racism, but when has that ever stopped us from airing a little righteous indignation? If, on the other hand, your whole goal is to foster a more equitable culture, you need to stop yelling racist at anyone who doesn't see the world exactly as you do. Somehow, you need to find enough common ground for a real conversation about race, because very few people are stupid or irredeemably mean. They'll listen to what you have to say if they trust you'll listen to what they have to say back. So before you say a single word, think of all the times you made an assumption about a stranger that proved to be untrue. Think of the times you found yourself feeling uneasy in the company of strangers of another race. Think about how you were forced to interrogate that uneasiness. Think of the plank in your own eye. To begin a real conversation about racism, start there.
Yeah, I mean, Dave and I talked about this. We had some back and forth about this a little bit because, I'm horrified by what has happened to George Floyd and what has happened to so many, mostly black men, but some black women in this country. I'm thinking of Sandra Bland, who died in police custody, who actually very, very close to Houston. But I think what I want to say is the response that I'm seeing, especially from white liberals, is, I don't know. It's either two responses, both of which drive me crazy. The first one is, yes, they're like, these people are racist and they're rednecks. And I mean, that hits all sorts of buttons for me as somebody from Mississippi. But then the other thing that I'm seeing is like people like, we have to examine our own, like I'm going to do the work kind of thing. And I'm like, cool, but like I feel like mostly you get it, and like maybe white people who permanently feel guilty are not really doing a lot for me except like getting to feel guilty. But there's this whole population of people who are legitimately racist, right? Who we're not engaging at all. We're just sort of like canceling them. We're kind of just like throwing them out, and that's not going to do us any good in the long run. I mean, it reminds me so much of that documentary about the flat earthers, people who believe that the world is flat. It's called Behind the Curve. And how there were all these social psychologists who were like, look, if you keep telling these people they're stupid, you're going to just back them so far across the room, you won't be able to reach them. Do the self-work if you want to do it. And you feel called to do it. I don't mean to poo-poo that, but like, it just feels inactive to me on some level. When the scary conversations we don't want to have, or maybe not so much with ourselves, but are with people who are legitimately racist. And how do we navigate that? How do we navigate this when they're our family? I mean, I'm from a place where I have family who say racist things. And one thing I would say is it was modeled for me very early in my household of origin to have these conversations with people who are racist in a compassionate way, but in a direct way. And that was a huge gift to me as a kid. So, I mean, I think that that's useful, but I mean, I distinctly remember, and I have a lot of aunts, so I can say this without knowing which one it was, but I distinctly remember just a few years ago, I was around one of my aunts and football was on and she made a racist comment. And I just turned her, we're going to call her Aunt Jane, because I don't have an Aunt Jane. I just turned to Aunt Jane. I said, Aunt Jane, we don't say things like that anymore. And it was like, and she looked at me like, we don't? And I was like, no, honey, we can't say things like that anymore. You don't talk like that anymore. Like, that's not where we come from on this anymore. I think the nuance here that I think is important is when we talk to people who are very racist or who are racist, I think we actually should say we, right? And I think, sure, there's some validity there. I'm certainly racist. I'm a white woman in 2020. But also, it keeps us from saying you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? To these people.
Yeah.
So you're wrong. You're one of these people. I'm going to set you straight.
Eat your vegetables, God damn it.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't work. So I don't know. I mean, that was a little ranty, but this definitely, I just don't know if all this like white lament is going to go anywhere.
Yeah, this article reminded me of, that famously bad quote from Hillary Clinton about the basket of deplorables, which just 100% backfired, and people started wearing T-shirts called deplorables, and the echo chamber and the temptation towards self-righteousness. And I bought this book. I haven't read it all the way through, but I think I've talked about it before, called Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right, written by a Berkeley sociologist who, in his own words, is trying to scale the empathy wall, like trying to understand people who are different and see the world differently, and to recognize that people don't always do and say things just because they're stupid or racist. Like, that may be part of it, but there are all sorts of people have stories, and that if you can show some love for people, there might actually be a chance of connecting and changing minds. And but with regard to all this stuff, Dave, I think the way you introduced it was perfect for me, because I feel so unqualified to talk about it. And the story which comes to mind is, a few years back, I don't know, something happened to me that I felt was unfair. I felt unjustly treated. I felt like my voice wasn't heard. I felt like I didn't matter. I felt sort of beaten down a little bit. And an older priest and kind of mentor, who's just a wonderful guy, was like, well, RJ, I know that you're kind of a wealthy white male, and this may be the first time in your life that you're experiencing something like that. But remember, there are whole segments of the population who feel that way all the time, and that was a good word to hear. It was like, oh yeah, this anger and this rage that I have is because I'm not used to feeling like I don't matter, and that someone can just criticize me and act with impunity. So again, I don't feel qualified to talk about it. It's just awful.
Yeah, it strikes me as a couple things. I think that the longer this sort of thing goes on, people want to say, oh, we're in this uniquely terrible time for this. But I'm of the opinion at this point that it's just being captured on camera. Like that's you can't kind of escape that. I do think that, Simeon's all given an incredible talk about sin hiding in plain sight, like what happened to the doctrine of original sin a few years ago. And he said one of the ways we talk about sin today is talk about cognitive bias and prejudice and the stuff that we inherit, and that is also just, when the writer says that, we're all endemic, prejudice is sort of endemic to how human beings organize themselves. And you want to be around that which is familiar. And you see it with, you see it the way kids organize, you see it the way we sort. We were talking about middle school a couple weeks ago. This is very much so. It really is a truth that if you think you got if you're completely coming at this with a clean slate, you're just you're lying to yourself. Yeah. For me, the most formative racial experience that I had was when I was in high school. I took a summer job working at a steel mill in Birmingham, Alabama.
I wish you guys could see RJ's face right now.
And
wow,
that's
amazing.
No one believes it.
I had no idea.
I had to wear steel-toed shoes, and I worked at a steel press standing there for 12 hours at a time with a guy who's named Fatback. And this was Alabama in the 90s, and it was not known as this terribly integrated place, and yet I watched black and white, a level of camaraderie and familiarity among these men that I was at a boarding school in the Northeast, which is the polar opposite socioeconomically of what I was dealing with. And it challenged every assumption I had, because these were supposed to be these super racist people who could never talk to each other, and yet these guys were giving each other a hard time, and in a funny and jocular way, and really talking about what really mattered. and they were having honest conversations actually about race in a way that I had never. Ours were much more circumscribed, and like, this is what you're allowed to say, this is what you're not allowed to say, and it was very open, enlightening for me, especially though in the way that I saw it play out in the Christianity of these folks, and that it was maybe their faith had different emphases than ours. I mean, we're right down the street from a doers of the word church, which couldn't have been more different than what I was sort of been raised to believe. But I saw a core level graciousness from the Christians in both. These were Baptists, Black Baptists, White Baptists, and the cultural narrative was that these were the enemy, or that they were these unenlightened hypocrites, and that just wasn't the truth. Or at least that wasn't the full truth, and there was a lot more going on. It was a really eye-opening thing for me, and that kind of, there's again no answer here except for, I guess, the awkward, painful process of even talking about these things. But I do know that very, very few people, there's a small portion of folks, and I'm saying this from Charlottesville, which is right across the street from, an office is right across the street where these race riots happened. There's a very, very small portion of the population that would self-identify as racist. It's like the term yuppie. No one actually considers themselves to be one. And so how do you then talk to someone if you lead with an accusation, just in any kind of life situation, just like in your marriage? If you lead with an accusation, if you lead with the law, a demand, you're going to go nowhere. And you're only going to everyone's going to end up being a pickier eater. Someone's going to become more self-righteous, and someone's going to become more, feeling more and more marginalized. And I remember when we had those riots here, there was a delivery man, a young black man, who said, the truth is, those white supremacist guys with the Nazi stuff, I kind of noticed you're clear of them. They never actually give us a hard time. It's when you're in the wealthy neighborhood and the lady in yoga pants calls the police when you're delivering food. That's the real issue. And those are the person with with the Bernie sticker on the back of their car or something like that. And that's enlightening. None of this is so hard to break down in a constructive way, and yet maybe bringing it into the light, the awful process, is part of the healing. I know that Sarah, that Christianity Today published an article just on the heels of this, saying that George Floyd left a gospel legacy in the 3rd Ward of Houston, where I know that you guys have done some work.
Yeah, I read that. It was so striking last night to see. I mean, I kind of couldn't believe what I was reading, that he just because it was like, oh my God, he served like right here, and they talked about him being in these community events, and we go to those community events. So this is this area in Houston where our church feeds kids every weekend. And it's the area that he worked in and was really passionate about the gospel in. And just to think that our paths had crossed, and that he loved those kids, the same kids that we love, it's just, it's just heartbreaking. I don't know. I feel really lucky, you guys. When I think about how my parents, the neighborhood I was born in was, I think I've talked about this before, was majority African American. The daycare I went to, I was one of the only white kids. Really early, that was imparted to me, and I know not everybody has that experience.
Yeah, it's tough because my father, who grew up on a farm in rural Holland, I don't think he saw a black person of color, black person, until he was in his 20s, and I think that led to choices about where we lived, where we went to school. Yeah, I mean, it's right. It's such a fine line between trying to change somebody else's mind, but also, I loved the way she ended this article, right, with a biblical quote: "Take the log out of your own eye."
Yeah.
Which it's amazing how many articles are quoting the Bible right now in so many different places.
Weird. It's like it's influential or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember that incredible article, "A Tale of Two Churches," that we read a few.
I was thinking about that too.
That article sticks with me. I think I'll link to it in the show notes. Let me just say, one thing I wanted to, the pastor who worked with Floyd in the 3rd Ward of Houston, Pastor Patrick P.T. Nguolo, he was bemoaning the fact that Floyd was a great guy, but the fact that we have to sort of build this narrative of righteousness around him in order for him to be lamented is, he's tired of it. He said, "The fact that you have to build a narrative for a man to be loved and given justice is repulsive to me. Even if he was a capital criminal, he deserved to be treated as someone created in God's image. I'm done coddling Christians who can only love people they deem to be lovable." the Christian message, it does not have to give this man a blameless righteousness first.
Right.
You have to
Right.
say, and that's what he was saying. He's like, let's talk about the man I actually knew, not some saint, in order to get your
Right.
attention. Because then you have like this sinlessness that gets imputed to the man, and that's not the point. The point is that he was deserving of dignity because he was created in God's image. So let's move from there to... we've confessed our complete ignorance and lack of any expertise. Let's go to No One Knows What's Going to Happen by Mark Lilla in the New York Times. And this mirrors something we quoted from Alan Jacobs a few weeks ago in all of these prognostication articles about the future of education. So he said, I wish we could write a computer script that would just go in every 5 sentences and insert the phrase, nobody knows anything. But this is Mark Lilla talking about our prediction addiction. People facing immediate danger want to hear an authoritative voice they can draw assurance from. They want to be told what will occur, how they should prepare, and that all will be well. We are not well designed, it seems, to live in uncertainty. The history of humanity is the history of impatience. Woo! I mean, isn't that like the Bible? No, not only do we want knowledge of the future, we want it when we want it. The book of Job condemns as prideful this desire for immediate attention. Speaking out of the whirlwind, God makes it clear that he is not a vending machine. We must learn to wait upon the Lord, the Bible tells us. Good luck with that, Job no doubt grumbled. Prophets today are less flamboyant than the Oracle of Delphi. Augurs have given up on sheep livers and replaced them with big data and statistical modeling. The wonder is that we still cry out for their help, given that the future is full of surprises. The public square is thick today with augurs and prophets claiming to foresee the post-COVID world to come. I myself have been pursued by foreign journalists asking what the pandemic will mean for the American presidential election, populism, the prospects of socialism, race relations, economic growth, higher education, New York City politics, and more. And they seem awfully put out when I say I have no idea. You know your lines, just say them. At some level, people must be thinking that the more they learn about what is predetermined, the more control they will have. This is an illusion. Human beings want to feel that they are on a power walk into the future, when in fact, we are always just tapping our canes on the pavement in the fog.
Well, it's just unassailably true, right, that people want to know the future. They want to be able to bank on something. We have a desire for control. And in some ways, I know we hesitate to talk about the gifts of this moment, but things are so uncertain and so ever-changing day to day. It's forcing us into greater flexibility, some degree of faith. I do think, also as Christians, we have this. There's some things we're sure about, or we say we're sure about, right? We're going to die. We are loved, and that. At the end of the day, everything actually is going to be okay, even if it's not today or tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now. And I think that to the degree we live in that hope and live in that faith, it gives us the ability to weather the storms of uncertainty that are just sweeping over us right now. Knowing that our lives, the lives of the people we care about, that we're responsible for, are ultimately not in our hands or their hands, but in God's hands. And I say that I'm someone, I don't know, I'm not a big planner, honestly. I am kind of a day-to-day, seat of my pants kind of person, so it's probably easy for me to say. There's something about this moment like that it wears on you, but there's also, it's a little bit exciting too, because every day is new and you never quite know what's going to happen. It goes back to that old cartoon, right? The Christians in the Colosseum with the lions being let in, and the little tagline, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, which is ridiculous and true at the same time. And for whatever's in God's plan for our life right now is for me to be moving in the middle of a pandemic, and Sarah to never leave the house, and Dave to have gotten a haircut and a dog. And God is present and active even in the midst of our fumbling uncertainties. And I find that profoundly hopeful. And again, I also find it profoundly hopeful that a Columbia humanities professor is quoting Job in the New York Times. Praise God for that. So, yeah, God's purposes move forward even in the midst of our uncertainty and fear.
Yeah, I mean, I am a planner, long-term planner, and so this has been really.
I'm so sorry.
This has been really hard. I mean, I don't want to like draw gender lines, but I wonder if that's like dad energy and mom energy. I really want to know what's going to happen a few months out from now. I do listen to all the pundits when they're like, this is what the economy is going to do, and this is when the second wave is going to happen, and this is, also knowing that like then I hear conflicting information around it. So this has been very hard for me to kind of not know. I mean, I've played like a brain game. I'm sure a lot of us have played where it's like, well, we'll know more by mid-May, and then like mid-May got here and it's like, okay, we still don't know anything. And then it was end of May. And now for me, literally what I'm saying to everyone, like a dummy, I'm just like, in mid-June, we'll know more, and it's like, maybe not, probably we won't, but I am like holding to that because it's a weird thing for me to try to let go of. I do feel like there's so much coming at us in terms of future projections and predictions. And I have found that to be exhaustive and also hard to turn off. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely want answers. I mean, I guess the thing, and I brought this up here before, but that I keep thinking about is like, the AIDS crisis and like how long it took for us to figure it out and how, my husband said probably a few weeks ago, he was like, we're really not going to know anything about this for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Which is true,
Apparently smoking helps. Apparently smokers have a lower rate of infection,
that,
so we should all take up
finally
smoking.
They get their day. You know what I mean? Like, turns out it was a good decision. Like, you do you,
right.
The hats
like
are switching all the time.
Sleeper when Woody Allen wakes up and he's like, turns out wheat germ is terrible for you, but chocolate and smoking are excellent.
Yeah. I keep looking at this prayer. Do you guys know the book Every Moment Holy?
No.
It's like a collection of like really, I mean, some of them are really quirky little liturgies. So like some of them, like there's one for a meal eaten alone, and there's actually one for first responders. There's a liturgy for waiters and waitresses. But anyway, there's one that I've read a lot with the small group I'm a part of. And I'm just going to read the first two paragraphs because they're my favorite, but it does go on from here. In a world so wired and interconnected, our anxious hearts are pummeled by an endless barrage of troubling news. We are daily aware of more grief, O Lord, than we can rightly consider, of more suffering and scandal than we can respond to, of more hostility, hatred, horror, and injustice than we can engage with compassion. But you, O Jesus, are not disquieted by such news of cruelty and terror and war. You are neither anxious nor overwhelmed. You carried the full weight of the suffering of a broken world when you hung upon the cross, and you carry it still. I've just taken a lot of rest in that, especially over the past few weeks, because it is just, I feel like I'm just standing in an ocean of barrage of information. And a lot of that is my own doing because I won't put my phone down and I won't turn the radio off. But, I mean, own doing is relative to the bound will these days. So here we are. But
no, it's all of a piece, isn't it? Because that what he's saying is that there's a need for control. When we're looking at these predictions, we want to know what the future holds because we want safety, but really what we want is control. And what the further level beyond that and is that you're going to look for what you kind of want to be true as well, especially when it comes to left-right distinctions. I don't think we've ever seen such a time when people are kind of looking for something. There's narratives, and everyone's trying to reinforce narratives, and you can watch someone look at the exact same piece of data and interpret it polar opposite ways. And it's another form of control. I have this story that needs to be true, and anything that contradicts it needs to be assimilated somehow. And Sarah, I do observe the same kind of mom energy, dad energy divide, at least in a lot of my colleagues and friends, that there is, for whatever reason, I tend to justify my desire to live in the moment and not in the future, but spiritually, and to say, I walk by faith, not by sight, all that stuff, and maybe there's
so much easier for dads.
I hope
anyway.
it does seem to be a lot easier for dads.
We've got to keep people's shoe sizes in our brains.
That.
So.
It's so true. Well, I'm just saying, I do think that my faith does play some role in my ability to not, I've always people always like, what's Mockingbird's 5-year plan? I was like, we don't have a 5-year plan. Our 5-year plan is that we don't
ask Sarah.
We don't believe in 5-year plans. But at the same time, part of that is also driven by fear. It's a different type of fear. It's a fear of being pinned down.
Yeah.
Totally.
And what people are saying, in either way, you're dealing with the human desire for control in some.
Yes.
Don't tell me what to do versus tell me what to do so I can do it. They're both very. You want the keys to your future in your own hands, and it is.
That's so interesting, Dave. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
So I when I'm tempted basically to rationalize the ease with which I don't live in the future. It is just as unsavory a route, and perhaps it mixed. It's mixed, just like everything. Well, I thought we would end on a. Oh, sorry, RJ. Yep.
Well, just one more thing. As Sarah was talking, it reminded me. Last Sunday, I preached on the First Peter passage in the lectionary, and it was so good. It was, "Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal you are enduring, as though something unusual were happening to you. But rejoice that you are sharing in the sufferings of Christ, in order that you might also share in His glory." And then he goes on to say, then he says, be careful, because Satan is prowling around like a lion looking to devour somebody. And I'll be honest, I didn't preach on that because I'm like, I don't need a bunch of moralism right now from you, Peter. But I think because of course I should have preached on that, because I thought about it. What he means is, what Satan wants to do is take away our hope, is take away our trust, is take away this faith that we have, that we are, that what we're experiencing is not unusual, that we are participating in the sufferings of Christ and will participate in His glory. And then, of course, Peter wraps up by saying, cast all your anxiety upon God, because He cares for you. And I think those are good words for right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, another good word for right now, which is sort of our final piece, is by Father Stephen Freeman, the Orthodox writer who we quote occasionally, haven't talked about in a little while. But he wrote something that I found profoundly hopeful. It's called "It's Good to Be Here." And in the midst of you don't actually have to turn on the news to be demoralized by the state of the world or your own life. You can simply just pay attention. But he said, a few days ago, after hearing a very distressing bit of social news, I found myself saying, I don't want to be here anymore. It was a voice of despair and sadness. The occasion had been a public altercation in which a stranger spat at a woman. It was the sort of thing that belongs among the lowest of human actions, but it happened. My distress, I realized, was a cry for something better, to be free of the darkness. The truth is that the darkness was slowly drawing me down. Our social strain is manifesting itself in many ways, many of them revealing the profound disease that underlies our culture. And this is nothing new. In 532 AD in Constantinople, over the course of a week, large parts of the city were destroyed by rioting and fires, including the earlier church of Hagia Sophia. This was in the early years of Justinian the Great's reign. The city had deep divisions between two semi-political sports factions, the Blues and the Greens. These factions also had connections to various nobles and senators with designs on the empire. The riots began in the Hippodrome, following the 22nd chariot race of the day. The palace was placed under siege, and the rioters set fires. Justinian thought to flee, but his wife, Theodora, talked him out of it, encouraged him to fight it out. I think Justinian was at a point of, I don't want to be here anymore. With a bit of intrigue and
his wife was like, we have a 5-year plan.
Yes. Don't mess it up. He's like, you're so controlling. With a bit of intrigue and a massive show of brute force, Justinian brought the city under control. The massacre that ended the riots is said to have resulted in over 30,000 deaths. Later that same year, construction began on the present Church of Hagia Sophia. 5 years later, with its completion, as well as numerous other projects, Justinian had transformed the city towards the glory that would make it renowned throughout the world. He writes, "The full account of Christian history is messy and marked as much by darkness as by light. Nevertheless, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. During the period of time of the riots, Mary of Egypt was newly reposed. Benedict of Nursia was writing his rule. Isaac of Syria was composing his hymns. Brendan the Navigator was crossing the Atlantic. Romanus the Melodist."
Brendan the Navigator. I want to
like,
be that
Wikipedia,
guy.
please.
Was he in the movie Flight of the Navigator?
I don't know.
Do you
Was
think
that
this guy is an
I'm about to do a
Orthodox
deep dive.
Do you think he's an Orthodox writer? No way. He said Isaac of Syria was composing his hymns. Romanus the Melodist was composing. Yeah,
He made that one up.
Romanus
Keep
the
going.
Melodious? By the
Listen to this.
way,
Wait.
It's Good to Be Here is the title of a Diggable Planet song.
RJ,
I'm
he's
just
got a
gonna
point.
say.
Go, Dave.
Sabas the Sanctified was founding the monastery of Lavra outside of Jerusalem. Columba of Iona was evangelizing Scotland, and doubtless thousands of other unknown souls sustained the universe with their prayers. Our time is no different. The darkness of our time contains the brightness of good souls whose deeds are known only to God. Despair comes when we look at the dark and forget the light. This is the great battle that rages in our day as well. Then it was blues versus greens. Now it is reds versus blues. Their champions are forgotten, as are their causes. Our champions will be swept away into the dustbin of history along with their urgencies. Justinian is not remembered for the riots, but for a church. And even so, many do not recall his name. Some do not even know the church. But holy wisdom, in whose honor the church is named, continues to frame and sustain the universe, sweeping away the meaningless dust of the darkness while building on the foundation of light. It is good to be here.
Yes, Padre. I like this.
You know, you got
This is very encouraging. I mean,
Brendan the Navigator.
Brendan the First of all, let's
Diggable Planets.
Yeah, next Mockingbird piece. Y'all buckle up, Brendan the Navigator. I mean, in all seriousness, like, we're hearing people are praying more. We're seeing huge numbers of people showing up for church virtually. We're seeing such encouraging work come from some people already. You know, I honestly, like, to tie it back to some earlier stuff, I'm not sure it's like the worst time for us to also be facing systemic racism. Like, there's a lot that we can be thinking about and
Let's get it all
praying
done
about.
in the next week or two.
Yeah, but I mean, like, there is a sense of, like, what are some beautiful things that will come out of this, you know? And how is God using this time in ways that we can't even imagine? I mean, that's a very powerful thought for me. I mean, I think just in my own house, my children are more precious to me than they were before this. My husband is more precious to me than he was before this. You know, I've learned the glory of paper plates. I mean, I feel like there's a lot that I'm really thankful for. And I don't know how God will use this time, for his people, but that is such an encouraging thought to have right now.
Yeah, you know, this Sunday is Pentecost, right? It's like the birthday of the church. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about the birthday of the church and the Holy Spirit, I was thinking about Jesus' words to the disciples. You know, it's better for you that I go away, because unless I go away, the comforter, the advocate, the Holy Spirit can't come. Mm-hmm. And what a strange thing that is to say, because it's like, really, Jesus, wouldn't it be just better if you stuck around? Wouldn't that just be easier so we could have you in the flesh? But I do feel like what I've seen in my church and in other churches are, rather than just being one physical Jesus, there's like lots of people kind of doing some of Jesus's work in the world by the power of the Holy Spirit. And it's been amazing to see, you know, people calling people and caring for people and providing for people's needs and teaching and praying. And it's been kind of amazing to see the decentralization of, you know, ecclesiastical work and authority, because I haven't been in Florida. I've been in Texas, and people have been doing amazing work. Even if they can't leave their house, they've been doing amazing work because they've been checking in on their friends. And so, yeah, it is. It's the first time I'm like, oh yeah, maybe it was better.
Well, it doesn't. What we're not saying though that the darkness somehow is light. What we're saying is that the light shines in the darkness. Because the darkness is real. Right. The George Floyds of the world, the people dying alone in hospital rooms in New York, and just the fights you're getting in with your spouse, those are real.
Yeah.
And the different ways you see the future and the addiction, all this stuff, that's real. But what we're also seeing is that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. And because that's what we'd be lying not to testify or bear witness occasionally to the fact that, Sarah, you said that you quoted your husband saying that we're not going to know really until 20 years what on earth really is going on. Mm-hmm. If you take Father Freeman, or you look at Tom Holland's Dominion, we may not know for 500 years. There might be some small act of kindness in a tiny town, in Saskatchewan, where something really important just happened that wouldn't have happened otherwise. I had sometimes students, boil things down to you, and a student just shot me a text. He's like, "Hey, I got a quick question for you when you get a sec. Where is God in the pandemic?" I was like, "Oh, just a little question. I'll just shoot you back a text." It's like, "Well, we talked," and I said, God is, on one level, God is hanging on a cross. And God is also in an empty tomb, and God is on the front lines. But we can't say for certain. We can say that God is present, especially when it seems that He's not. And we can also say that we will only see through a glass darkly. And there are things, a lot of the good things that have happened in your own life, just like the baseball card story that we told. It didn't come out for 30 years later did he actually mention, the one thing that you don't even remember doing was the most important thing that ever happened to me.
Yes. Your life is hidden with God in Christ. And I'm also reminded of what a couple of things. One, what Luther said was the religions that are closest to Christianity is actually like animism, because at least animists locate God working in the world, that He's not somehow separate or lofty or separated. He is doing something right now, even if we don't understand what it is. And Dave, I appreciate your, sort of realism and grounding us in the difficulty of this moment. And at the same time, I also remember Todd Brewer's really convicting piece a few weeks ago about how Paul talks about suffering, and he's always turning people back to the hope we have in Jesus Christ. And there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the New Testament. And yet the outlook seems to always to be hopeful, even in the midst of suffering and pain and death, and so I don't know. That's a delicate balance, right? Something we're still working through. How do we acknowledge the reality of people's pain, because we know that God is on our side, that He is working, that He'll bring things all to completion, while also remaining hopeful and without being Pollyanna-ish or every cloud is a silver lining-ish. We don't want to do that. I'm not quite sure how to walk that rope just yet.
There's a photograph I keep thinking about that kind of defines that moment for me, that is of a doctor in Italy. You guys may have seen this, and she's fallen asleep in front of the computer that she's putting her charts in, with her mask on, and the photographer called it the sleep of the righteous, or the rest of the righteous, the rest of the righteous, which is such a, feels like such a biblical phrase to me. And I think there's so much about that photograph that I love. I mean, I love that it's captured this woman's calling and commitment to care for people as they're dying, that it's captured the kind of risk that she's putting herself in. But I also, for me, and I think maybe this is what I was trying to say, Dave, I love that someone has been able to see this and not just see it as sad, but to see there's something maybe even transcendent about it. And I think that is what I find incredibly moving about this piece, and about the way that we're dealing with this time is yes, it is awful and is all these horrible things. But if you are a person that can see that, it's everywhere right now. because God is working in this in such a fervent way. And that doesn't mean that we know it. It doesn't mean that we feel it, but there are just these moments that you're like, oh my gosh, like it's thick with the Holy Spirit.
And that's the theology of the cross, right? That's one of the things we hold on to most tightly, is that God is at work where he would seem to be absent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't have to look for news stories or the Mockingcast to look in your own life. There's fruit being born, or those are the lives of people around you.
Yes.
You don't have to get a puppy to be dealing with new life. There's all sorts of...
It helps, though.
Well, it's good to be here, and it's good to be with the two of you. And I wish you safety and joy and maybe a little rest during these next couple weeks. And all of our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. And we'll be back at you, I think, the 3rd week of June. So be well.
See you then.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.